Welcome to the Superbold podcast. I'm Fred Joyal, and my very special guest today is Dr. Mark Goulston. He is a psychiatrist, a prolific author, and the best description I have for him is a healthy conflict coach. He is very good at talking to people who are in conflict, who are experiencing trauma, PTSD in particular, and many other things that we're going to get into. He has written many books. My favorite title is Talking to Crazy: How to Deal with the Rational and Impossible People in Your Life. He is very good at helping you do that. We're going to talk about all sorts of things. So let's dive right in. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Fred. Boy, you just covered a bunch of things. One of my mentors, Warren Bennis, had this saying, one of the best things about people saying nice things about you is it gives you something to live up to.
Well, I think you've lived up to it really well. You've done a lot of work with soldiers. You've actually worked a lot with healthcare workers now post COVID. But we talked about something to do with your parents. I mean, we're going to talk about how your work requires a lot of boldness and actually asks boldness from people. So obviously, my cause is to get people to be bolder and have a more positive and more fulfilling life because of it. But you really help them through a lot of their conflict and difficulty. And you had a very challenging conflict to deal with your own parents. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so Fred, when I thought about coming on the podcast and what it's about and being bold in your book, Superbold, I have lots of stories, and I'm not sure that I've shared this story before. And I don't know if it's bold. I think it'll be relevant to your audiences. So both my parents have passed away a number of years ago. Before my father passed away, he had Alzheimer's, and they lived in Florida. And my father used to have a photographic memory, so Alzheimer's was particularly rough on him. And my mother would call to just say how he was driving her crazy because he would spend all day trying to remember everything he forgot, and he was losing the battle. And she said, "You've got to come and see if you can get him to do something." So I live in Los Angeles. They were in Florida. I flew to Florida. And then for 3 days, I tried to convince, cajole, humor him to do something other than just sit in this porch staring out at a golf course that he used to play on. And I didn't know what was going on in his mind. And the night before I was leaving, he looked at my mother and he looked at me. And then he said to me, "Do me a favor. Don't visit again so soon. Both of you get off my effing back." So I thought, mission unaccomplished. And I was up all night. Because I just felt awful. And then the next morning, I was there. It was a few hours before I was going to take a plane back. And I was seated in the porch. And there was my father just sort of staring out. I didn't know what was going on in his mind. And I was looking through the galley of my first book. And the galley is before it comes out. So my first book is called Get Out of Your Own Way. And I'm holding up the edition that you can get on Kindle forever for $4.92, because this is the Indian English version, but you can get it. So I'm looking through the galley, and there's a bunch of chapters there of self-defeating behaviors. And so one of the chapters is trying to change other people. That's a self-defeating behavior. So at the end of the chapter, it says, don't try to change others, accept others as they are and hope they change, instead of not accepting them at all until they change. So I'm reading that, and I thought, why don't you practice what you preach?
Doctor,
So I
heal
put,
thyself. Yes.
so I put the book down, and the tone of my voice was different. I said, "Hey, Dad, how are you doing? Hey, Dad, how are you doing?" And I think he heard the tone, which was much more inviting than trying to convince him. And my father was not a particularly insightful, introspective person. He was a good man, but he wasn't introspective. He was a person of the Depression. Also, to appreciate what happened next, you have to know that 20 years earlier, he had colon cancer. And my mother said, "Don't tell him he has the big C because he'll obsess about it." He's getting treatment, but we come from a generation where you hear the word cancer and your dad will get kind of nutty about it. So you have to figure that mindset, not particularly introspective, afraid of those kinds of things. So I said, "So, Dad, how are you doing?" And he looked over at me, then he looked away, then he looked over at me, and then he looked down. And I'd never seen my dad cry. And he teared up and he said, "I never thought it would turn out this way.
Wow.
I never thought it would turn out this way." Yeah, wow was right. Uh, and and then he looks at me, and his face is all scrunched up because he's trying to understand something. And again, he has Alzheimer's. He has trouble understanding anything. And again, this is the guy who didn't want to know what the big C meant. And he looks at me because I'm a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and he looks at me and he scrunches his eyes and he says, "What is Alzheimer's disease?" And I go, "Whoa."
Hmm.
And I say, "Well, it's, where your memory for things a few minutes ago isn't so good. You can remember things from 60, 70 years ago, and life can be really confusing. And it's kind of rough to concentrate on what's going on." And then he squinched his eyes. He was just trying to use whatever his neurons that were still connected with. And he looked at me and he had this kind of scared look. And he said, "Do I have it?" And I looked at
Mm-hmm.
him and I said, "I don't know. You used to have a photographic memory. Maybe you're just frustrated by it. I don't know. I mean, possibility he was probably quite depressed." And I said, "I don't know. Uh, but I do know that I love you." And I went over, I kissed him, and then we went for a walk. I think that's the power of connecting with people emotionally where they're at. And that's been my whole career. We can segue over to my work as a psychiatrist focused on suicide prevention. And for over 30 years, none of my patients died by suicide. And what I learned about people who are very suicidal is they often can't come where you're at. You have to go where they're at. They're stuck. In fact, I'll share an anecdote that really taught me this. I was called to do a consultation early in my career. I think I might have still been in psychiatric residency at UCLA. And I was called up to do a consultation on someone we'll call Mr. Jones. And the doctors paged me and said, "You have to come up and okay the order for restraints." We had to tie his arms down and his legs down because he was just, kicking and he was pulling at his IVs. He had a respirator tube down his throat through his mouth, and he was pulling at that. He was pulling at everything. And they said, "Come up and okay the restraints and the antipsychotic medication." So I go up there, and Mr. Jones' eyes are as wide as saucers. And the tube is in his mouth, and he's saying, "Ah, ah, ah, ah." I said, "What is it?" And he went, "Ah, ah, ah." I said, "What's going on?" And he was trying to tell me something. And then I put a pencil in his hands, which were tied down, and I put a piece of paper next to it, and I said, "Write it down." And he just scribbled. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe they were right, that he was just psychotic. And I said, we had to put your arms and legs down because you were pulling at the IVs, you were kicking, at the bed, you were pulling at the respirator, and we gave you a medicine to calm you down. And when you calm down, we'll take you off the restraints and off the medicine. And all he did was look at me with his eyes. So a day later, they paged me and they said, Mr. Jones is off the respirator. He's off his restraints and he's seated in bed, and he told us to page you. So I go up into the room and he looks at me with his eyes. They weren't wide like that, but he looked at me intently, like I'm looking into your eyes. And he said, pull up a chair. And he sat me in the chair with his eyes. And he looked at me and he said, what I was trying to tell you is that a piece of the respirator tube was broken and was stuck in my throat. And you do know that I will kill myself before I go through something like that again. Do you understand me? And he
Wow.
just stared at
Yeah.
me. And my eyes got a little watery. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I understand you. But that gave me a message that, and this applies, I think, to everyone in our lives. Underneath what people are saying to us, they're always trying to communicate something else. And it was interesting. So in my practice as a psychiatrist focused on suicide prevention, after seeing Mr. Jones, when I would see patients who were depressed or suicidal, what I would focus on were three things. Where's the hurt? Where's the fear? Where's the anger? And how much time before you do something destructive?
So Mark, let's say that again for my listeners, because I think it's those simple things, because this idea that you came in with what you thought was wrong with Mr. Jones, and that's how you acted, rather than being able to find out something actually really simple that he couldn't communicate, but it was totally different than your interpretation. So those three things again, and it's really the fourth one actually is critical. But say that again for my listeners.
Yeah, so, and sometimes I would do it without even asking, but then I would sometimes say to people, what hurts and where does it hurt? And I would get them to share what that is. What are you afraid of?
Mm.
And often the fear would be, I'm afraid that I can't keep taking it any longer. It's just too much. And then I might say, what do you, is there anything that you're angry at? Because anger gets people agitated. And they might say, yeah, I'm angry that nothing's worked. Nothing's helped. And everybody throws pills at me. And then we run out of time and I don't feel any better. And and then I would say, at its worst, how deeply can you feel those things before it crosses over into a self-destructive impulse? So it was interesting, Fred. I learned to listen so deeply for those, and they were always there, that sometimes I didn't know the gender or the race of the person I was speaking to. There was one person I saw for 6 months, and I said some comment, and I
So
don't think it
some
was,
of these were just telephone consultations,
yeah,
sort of,
this was
or
in person. And this
oh
was all in person. I mean,
yeah.
I saw a guy, and after 6 months, I said some comment, and he looked at me. He said, Mark, I'm black. I didn't know he was black. And he was black. But when you tune in and hurt, fear, anger, I'm going to do something about it, is so powerful So it was like putting a syringe into the dark night of the soul that's starting to bubble over. And what surgical empathy is going in and putting a syringe in there and just pulling it out. And you pull it out when they feel felt by you, which is different than feeling understood. So here's a difference between professional and clinical empathy and surgical empathy. And see if you can feel the difference in the nuance. So imagine you're just really depressed. You're at your wit's end. And professional clinical empathy might be, uh, are you depressed? Yes. How long have you been depressed? And when it gets really bad, have you thought of hurting yourself? Do you have a means to hurt yourself? And you're saying it in a kindly way, but professional. And again, think of now people with electronic data stuff, and you're there trying to empathize, but you're typing because you have to enter stuff into the electronic record. And so you're
Yeah.
trying to be complete. You're trying to cover yourself professionally, and that's all fine. But think of how that feels, and where surgical empathy would be, you're depressed, aren't you? Yeah. And you're really depressed. Is that true? And it gets scary, doesn't it? How scary does it get? Tell me about when it got scariest since we last met. Do you follow me? And then they just share it. Could you feel the difference?
Oh, it's phenomenally different. It's, I mean, I the professional empathy to me isn't really professional empathy. It's professional, uh, like a clinical treatment, a clinical pathway. This is, and I hope when people are listening to this, we're talking about some very serious and heavy things, but empathy is critical to every relationship that matters to you. Your ability to successfully empathize with persons that are close to you, that mean something to you, that are struggling, as everyone is on some level or and at some time. Your ability to do that, it makes all the difference in how loving that relationship can really be, and how much you can, if you want to help, if you want to encourage them to get through this, to be able to change themselves, to solve this. You have to, it's very important to understand this. If you're in any sort of professional capacity with a client, a customer, a patient, your ability to effectively empathize it will make all the difference in your career, in your treatment, in how people feel about you, and how you feel about yourself. And I think what's interesting is you've talked about how, when what went wrong, like when you when you missed the cues and you said, I have to find a way to get the real information out of these people, and so you're going in surgically to find out where they are, what they're actually feeling, rather than typing, going through the checklist, the psychiatric
Uh,
checklist.
yes, something I discovered about suicide, and I wrote a blog after Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade died by suicide. It got 400,000 views in 2 weeks. It's on Medium. I think it may also be some other places. And it got a lot of views because the title of the blog was Why People Kill Themselves. It's Not Depression. So that got a lot of views. And I said, there's hundreds of millions of people who are depressed who don't kill themselves. There's hundreds of millions of people who get divorced, who lose a business. It can all contribute to it, but the vast majority of those people don't kill themselves. But in my work with suicidal patients, one of the things that I found was common to nearly all of them is that at the end they felt despair. And if you break the word despair into DES-PAIR, that stands for undefined. paired, and they feel unpaired with the future, hopeless,
Yeah.
unpaired with the ability to get better, helpless, powerless, worthless, useless, meaningless, purposeless. And when they all line up, pointless. And so they pair with death to take the pain away. And what surgical empathy is they're pairing with death, and they put it in their back pocket, and they don't tell people because they don't want to scare people after they've been through treatment a few times and it didn't work. But in their back pocket, they say, worst comes to worst, I can always end it all. And they're not talking about it. But surgical empathy uses something called radical attunement. And radical attunement means you go in there, and by their feeling felt by you, they might let go of feeling felt by death to take the pain away and grab on to feeling felt by you. Something I want to give your audience, because your audience, and thank you to the audience if you've listened this long, because this might be different than some of the other Superbold podcasts. But I'm going to give you 4 prompts that you can use if you're worried about a teenager, a spouse, or anyone. But let's focus on teenagers because that's one of my focuses. And what you're able to do with a teenager because of the pandemic, and you do this during an activity. You don't initiate a heart-to-heart, face-to-face talk with them unless they initiate it. They can't stand those face-to-face talks. So you're driving, you're doing an activity, and this is the script. You say, hey, most of us parents are worried about our kids. You know, we know the lockdown, the opening up, the masks, falling behind in school, and we're all worried. Can I run some things by you? And hopefully they'll groan and say, okay, Dad, okay, Ma. And here are the 4 prompts. At its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they're going to go, what? Or they're going to go, what the F? You
Yeah.
say, yeah, at its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they might say, pretty awful. Second prompt, when you feel that, how alone do you feel? How alone are you with it? Pretty alone. Here's the surgical empathy. Pretty alone or all alone? Okay, all alone. Third prompt, take me to the last time you felt it. Yeah, was it 2:30 in the morning a few nights ago? We heard you walking around in your bedroom in the middle of the night. And when was the last time you felt it? And something magical happens when they can describe uh, when they felt it so clearly that you can see it with your eyes as the parent. They re-feel it. Yeah, I was walking around. I couldn't get to sleep. Wow, that's frustrating. What happened next? Well, I couldn't get to sleep. I didn't know whether to kick the wall or punch something. Wow. And how long did that go on? It just kept going on. What'd you do next? I started looking for cough medicine, see if I could drink something or go to sleep, and I couldn't find any. Oh, and then what happened? Well, I was just worried about this test that I have today, and then, or the next day, and then what happened? Then the sun rose. Fourth prompt. And by this time, they may be giving you the gift of looking in your eyes. And you look at them and you say, I have a favor to ask. Whenever you're feeling that way, or you get close to feeling that way, I want you to do whatever it takes to get your mom or your dad or my undivided attention. Because we have hundreds of things going on in our heads, and there's nothing more important to either of us than helping you feel less alone when you're feeling that awful. So, honey, would you do that?
Yeah, that's phenomenal advice. And, I have a 15-year-old nephew, and he's right at that age where his dad is trying to give him life lessons and insights and keep him open in the dialogue. And I can see him gradually closing off as he goes into his teenage life. Um, And
So
so,
let me tell you something really important. I'm about to write an article on unsolicited advice, why people resist it, and why people give it.
yeah,
So what I'm going to talk about, and teenagers and spouses for that matter, almost everyone resists unsolicited advice. And the reason they do, but think of teenagers, and I know this from working with teenagers, they say, I think mom or dad is giving me advice. Yes, they want to help, but they're giving me advice because I'm scaring them. They're giving me
yes,
solutions.
yeah,
Now, if I ask for advice, that's different. But if I don't ask for advice, I don't want it, but I'm scaring them. So they're giving me all this advice. Here's the problem. If they give me unsolicited advice and I don't do it, I'm frustrating them. Why didn't I follow their advice? Because I wasn't looking for advice. Well, what were you looking for? I was looking for comfort. You know, when you're hemorrhaging emotionally, yes, you need to stop the hemorrhage, but you need comfort uh, because you're terrified. And what I need from you, mom or dad, is something that you have in short supply, which is to listen to me and be patient. And if I know that you're not trying to rush me into some solution so that you can feel less scared, you know, I'll feel comforted. I'll feel less alone. And then maybe I'll say, hey, maybe mom, maybe dad, maybe we can we brainstorm about, what's the best thing to do? But don't jam me with that stuff when really what I'm looking for initially is comfort, which is help me express what I'm feeling because it's all locked up inside and it's all agitated. So using those 4 prompts would help them express what's going on inside.
yeah. I could see that you connected something for me that I always wondered about, but the advice is an impulse, a need based on fear. That makes it really clear because the fear is not like super evident, but it is underneath it driving the need. And it could be a fear that, oh, you're just going to get sick, or you're going to get hurt, or you're going to get your feelings hurt, or you're going to experience failure and you're going to feel bad. Any number of those things. But just understanding that that's at the base of it is really powerful. I want to uh, go into something else because in you there's so much that you do in your work that's in some ways is counterintuitive, but a lot of it is just you've learned over the years how to be incredibly effective in digging deeper into people and finding out what they're feeling and having feeling what they're feeling, having them feel that you feel it, which is true empathy. Which is a lot of people say they're really they're half empathetic and mostly sympathetic. They struggle with it because they're not they're scared of it. They're scared of what that person's feeling. I think. But you've got, I believe it's called the four reallys. Is it four or is it
4 or 5
when you?
really.
Yeah, talk
So
about that. But I do want to talk as a quick light moment. You've spent a lot of time in Russia talking to the people in that country, and they're translating your stuff, and they translated the title of your book, "Talking to Crazy." What did they translate that to? Um,
okay. So here is marketing 101. Uh, a friend of mine named Tony Baxter, he was one of the main Imagineers at Disney, and he introduced the term to me, mental real estate. And I said, Tony, what is mental real estate? He said, mental real estate is when you give people something that's familiar, they lean into it because it's familiar, and then you twist it, you have mental real estate. He said, Pirates of the Caribbean owns the word pirates in the minds of kids. So Disney owns pirates. So talking to crazy is a fair amount of mental real estate, because when I shared with people, I'm thinking of writing a book called Talking to Crazy, people would say, I need that book today. Why? Oh, every day I talk to someone who's crazy, including myself. So that was good mental real estate. But what happened is, and here's an interesting anecdote. So a few years ago, I headlined as a speaker in Moscow along with a Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman. He wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. And I said, you're having me headline with a Nobel Prize winner? I'm just a shrink from California. I mean, what is this? They said, his book did not go viral. And and so the Russian title of Talking to Crazy, talk about mental real estate, is How to Talk to Assholes. And it went viral. In fact, I get to Moscow, and a lot of other countries are into reading much more than America. And as you're walking around the streets of Moscow, there's all these book kiosks, there's bookstores. And I would go into the bookstore and I'd say, do you have a copy of Talking to Assholes? And whoever I was speaking to, they say, oh my God, it's the author of Talking to Assholes. And so they'd gather everyone from the store and they'd go over to where the whole book was on, multiple copies of it. And it's interesting. I said to my publisher, I said, before it goes into paperback, can we pivot and change the title? And I love my publisher, HarperCollins, but of course, dealing with any huge organization, we can't do that. It's in the catalog. It's blah, 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 blah. And I say, well, you can do what you want, but you change the title, How to Talk to Assholes, it'll be a bestseller. But, that's the challenge of trying to get through to people. But
Yeah.
use that concept of mental real estate. What is it that you can say to people that causes them, to just go, wow, and hold on to them? But getting back to the 5 realies, that was something that I learned from a good friend of mine. He was the chief operating officer of the Marines in the early 90s, and he went on to become the CEO of the U.S. Intrepid, that's the aircraft carrier on the Hudson. And General Marty Steele, I just loved this guy, and he loved his Marines. And he taught me about the 5 realies because we worked on a transition program for returning military from 2007 to 2008. That it got canceled because of the funding ran out because of the Great Recession. And he said when he would interview these Marines one-on-one, he'd say, how's it going, Marine? And they'd say, well, it's a little different to be in a war zone and being transitioning to home. And he'd say, I understand that's really difficult, but what's really going on? Well, it's tough to talk to my family, and I don't want to talk to my family about what I've seen. It was pretty, difficult. No, I understand it's pretty difficult. And so he said, when you get to the 4th or 5th really, they would look you straight in the eye and they'd say, sir, I saw and did horrible things. And when I close my eyes, I see them more vividly, so I don't close my eyes much, sir. And he gave them a direct order. All of us Marines, when we've been in a war zone, we've all seen and done horrific things, but you have earned the right to a life. And I'm giving you a direct order to exercise that right and put that aside. And he got letters from spouses saying, you saved my spouse's life. So that's the power of the 5 realies.
And it's just peeling back. It's saying, but what's really going on? And of course, as you talk, one of the first things you really started talking about back in when did Just Listen come out? Was it 2008 or is it
2009?
Yeah. The power of people sensing that you're listening when you ask those questions. I mean, you do it so naturally and have done it that way for so long. And this general has done that as well. But that's the thing, is when you ask these questions, when you say what's really going on, You're not trying to fill in the blank yourself, which is what we do, which is when we're not listening, when we're waiting to speak because we have advice for them. We have some unsolicited advice that we'd like to offer as soon as
Well, no,
possible.
what it is we're getting scared the deeper we go into them. But the deeper we go into them, the more they're getting stuff off their chest that they have squashed down. During the pandemic, I co authored 2 books with Diana Hendel. She was the CEO of Long Beach Memorial Hospital when an employee of the month came in and killed his 2 supervisors and himself. And she led the hospital back to emotional and financial profitability. And then she resigned because she realized she had PTSD. And one of the books that we wrote is called Why Cope When You Can Heal. And that's where we introduced the term surgical empathy. We also talked about trauma, that when you're going through trauma, and in your mind's eye, think of healthcare workers right at the peak of the pandemic when there wasn't enough protective equipment, when they were afraid of getting infected, when they went home and stayed in their garage because they didn't want to infect their relatives. This is before the vaccine. And what we talk about in Why Cope When You Can Heal is that in order to survive trauma, uh, one of the things we talked about was the horror, terror, fragile trifecta, which means when you see something horrific and then you take a break from it, you go home, you're terrified. Oh my God, I can't believe what I just saw. And you feel close to panicking. But what happens is you go back because whether it's military or healthcare workers, you often go back not just for the patients, you go back because your peers are going back. You don't want to let them down. And what happens is you get this huge burst of adrenaline mixed with testosterone, which is I'm going to go back and I'm going to take care of this. And the cocktail of adrenaline plus testosterone insulates you from your thoughts and your feelings. So what enables you to push them down? Because if you felt them and thought them, you couldn't function. And so that adrenaline and that testosterone, I'm not going to let this take me down. So you push it away, you push it away, and you push it away. And then what happens is the danger passes and the insulation goes away. So in other words, the adrenaline and testosterone insulation goes away. And as one healthcare worker I spoke to said, they said, what it's like is imagine you have a feral cat screaming and you lock it in a cellar because you got to function. And then you lock 2 more. Then you lock 5. Then you lock 50. And what you're afraid is that when the danger passes and the insulation passes and that you open the door, that they're all going to rush the cellar door and eviscerate you. So you're afraid that everything you pushed away to function is going to come back and eviscerate your mind. The danger is past. So our whole approach in Why Cope When You Can Heal is, and we want to do pilot programs, but again, I am a outlier. I am someone who comes up with creative solutions, but I don't have a team. And when I go to places that are struggling with these things, they say, we already have it covered. We have programs. You're well connected, Mark. Can you get us funding? And so, we're kind of like outliers. But what we want to do is put together a pilot program for healthcare workers or veterans. And together you facilitate their talking and walking through the traumas. By the way, this is how psychedelics work and why it works on trauma. Because what happens is it really causes a therapeutic psychosis when you take ayahuasca or some of the other psychedelics, but you have a shaman or a therapist calmly saying, no, it's okay. You can throw up. No, you can get diarrhea. No, you're not losing your mind. Your mind is uh, is uh, is just is just freeing itself. You're just actually surrendering to all the trauma you've been through that wants to come up and out. And so, part of the reason psychedelic therapy works is you're out of control. You're out of control and you surrender, which is very difficult for some of your audience who are control freaks to do. But when you're out of control, you surrender and you get these visions and you get these hallucinations and you get these voices. And sometimes that feels like, oh my God, I found God. Now, really, you didn't find God. What happened is you've been so suppressed and repressed for so long that when you, instead of shaking up the Rubik's Cube, you smashed it with a hammer, everything went all over the place. But the shaman guides you back, and that smashed up Rubik's Cube suddenly becomes a big puddle of mercury. And the little mercury things come together and they connect and you reintegrate. And at the end of that psychedelic experience, you look at the world through different eyes.
Fascinating. Yeah, I can see it. And when you talk about those chemicals, those are, adrenaline and testosterone. Those are warrior chemicals, right? I don't have time to think about how hard this is or how bad this is. I'm in warrior mode. And then when that is happening in regular life, like in the trauma centers, it's interesting that's a lot of hospitals, they call it trauma centers. The healthcare workers experiencing the trauma as well, and stacking them up. But being able to know that stuff can be released and has to be released because it's stored, I believe, on a cellular level, and wants to come out, and you're gonna carry it until you find a way to let it out. So this is some really powerful stuff. So Mark, I so appreciate this conversation, and I think we're gonna have to do it again because there's so much ground that you cover in your life, and so much impact that you have and I think my audience really benefits from these kind of insights because of their careers as well. So I want to ask you one more question because I like to hear this. What excites you right now? What's the most exciting thing you've got going on right now?
Well, I'll share this with you because you might want to join it. I'm 74, and life is very precious to me, and I'm really committed to leaving it better than I found it. So I've assembled a team. It's a grandiose project, and it's called A World Transform, the Rising Tide That Lifts All Hopes. And our team is made up of a fellow named Rob Nail. He was the co-founder and CEO of Singularity University with Peter Diamandis. So he's a futurist, and he's into AI.
Yeah.
And our other partner is a young man, Andy Earl. He owns a ghostwriting company, and he helps people. And so he can pull books out of people, but he's a great interviewer. And he's our Anthony Bourdain without the depression. So he goes and he's spending a month in different countries. And our belief is that 99% of the world has the same vision for the future 30 years from now when their grandchildren will be born. So our vision is a shared collective vision for the future that brings hope to the present. And we see it as a documentary. Someone we both know from our metal organization, Fred Spaniard, he produced Live Aid, and he said, I'll produce global live events for you. So we see it as a documentary, global live events, a social media platform, and on a lark, we bought the domain DuckDuckWorld, where people share, like TikTok, they just share videos and their stories of what they're going through, but how they're making that shared vision a reality, what they're doing. So that's why we call it the rising tide that lifts all hopes. And what Fred said about Global Live Aid, he said, you need a celebrity to drive this. So I don't know if anyone knows Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, but that's who we have identified, because this will prevent Prince Harry from turning into Princess Margaret.
Yeah.
It'll give him and his wife a mission. And if the focus is the 99% of the world that doesn't get heard, he would relate to that. He doesn't get heard by the royals. That's why he had to leave.
Yeah.
So it's a grandiose project. We have an increasing list of count me ins, which if you want, I'll count you in. There's 35 on it. And we
Count
have
me
the
in. Yeah.
we have the head of the Compassion Lab at Coca-Cola, the founder and CEO of the World Food Bank, um, the former president of Rhode Island College. And so these are all people, when they see the vision, it's just so clear. Let's and I love our Anthony Bourdain. His name is Andy Earl, because he's just wide-eyed, 32. I wish I had that optimism about me and adventure, and he just pulls stories out of people.
Love it. Well, I can see why you're excited about it, and as it develops, we'll stay on top of it and let people know. And so you can find out more about Mark. His books are all on Amazon, but you can go to his website, which is markgoulston.com, and you can learn all sorts of stuff about him there. Pick up his books, learn how to talk to crazy people. Learn how to talk to your teenagers. He has some powerful tools.
And come to my podcast, My Wake Up Call. It's in the top 0.5% globally. And one of my favorite guests was Fred Joyal.
Yes, My Wake Up Call. It's had 20 million downloads or some insane number like that.
Who knows what it is? Yeah.
But yes, it's about those moments where people's lives changed and how it changed them. Terrific stuff. But Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I think this has been intensely valuable for people. So stay well, my friend, and thank you so much.
Well, you gave me a long leash, and I took advantage of it.
Excellent. All right, everyone out there, subscribe, do all that stuff that people beg you to do at the end of the podcast, and keep on becoming bolder.